Welcome back everyone to another video on the Vixen Victory channel. Today we're going to be talking about Varesa. Now, sorry for the lateness in the recent capacity of other videos, but with everything with the new character, I definitely wanted to make sure we did Varesa correct. Now, looking at her as a character and making sure she's been done correct, let's actually go ahead and check out her build guide and look at how to build her, her talents, her level up priority first and foremost. Then we'll jump into the actual weapons, artifacts, and obviously constellations and teams. So without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into those talents. Looking at the talents that she has, keep in mind, really, even still with the, trial and whatever, as you see 888, for some characters, you're not going to necessarily need to do that. But with Varesa, she is one of those characters that actually likes to have all three of her talents leveled. And there's multiple reasons to that, so let's go ahead and look at the normal attack. Your normal attack is going to be increasing a lot of your damage for your normal, charge, and plunging attack damage. And if you know anything about Varesa at all, she is a plunging attack character. Now, at the same time, this also increases something called the Fiery Passion. If we look at the skill attributes as well, the Fiery Passion hits will also be increased, and the charge attack damage for them and the plunging attack damage will also be increased. So it's another reason to go into the normal attack talent because of what the whole reason behind the normal attack talent is and increasing your damage from those. Once again, seeing all of these Fiery Passion, basically, these are your three basic regular normal charge and plunging attacks, and then the Fiery Passion each has its own different normal charge and plunging attack as well, which we're actually going to get into in a second. Looking at the skill, it's called Riding the Night Rainbow. It states that basically with her, you're going to display the true spirit of Lucha Libre and rushing forward into an enemy into a certain distance and dealing Nitro aligned electro damage to all the opponents that she hits in her path. After she uses this skill, Varesa will gain 20 Nitro points and gain the follow-up strike effect. Varesa has increased interruption resistance during this time frame in the follow-up strike effect, and upon pressing her normal attack, she will quickly unleash a charge attack that does not consume stamina. In doing so, she will have a few different techniques as well that she actually can get through this. Now, looking at the follow-up strike, by the way, it will cancel the charge attack, so you kind of have to use the normal attack, turning kind of it into that, kind of special charge attack here. But looking at the tap version, you're basically just going to rush forward, and what a lot of people are going to see is the sudden onrush mode that a lot of people tend to see with Varesa here, and that's going to look like this. That's technically usually what you're going to see with a lot of characters that kind of do that, but at least specifically with Varesa, that's what a lot of people are going to show, specifically just because of her overall capability in being a really good character, but also having the ability to kind of do a lot more of the overworld exploration, and obviously our Natlan characters do very well at that. Now, in the sudden onrush mode and that hold skill, she's going to continuously consume those Night Soul points you showed, or I showed on the left side, and in that state, Varesa's movement speed and interruption resistance are increased. She can use the terrain to execute flying leaps or consume additional Night Soul points to traverse atop water or liquid phlogiston, so she can run on water and liquid phlogiston as well, which is like the lava type equivalent. So that's something to keep in mind with her for a lot of, once again, those usages with her when she's in the overworld. Now, when she uses this skill, she actually also has 2 charges of it. So this will actually be very helpful in the capabilities that we're going to show in the teams and the gameplay that I'm going to show you as well. In these 2 charges, when Varesa enters the Fiery Passion state, she will obtain an additional tap charge of her elemental skill and its damage will be increased. Now, looking at the Fiery Passion state, it states that while not in this state, Varesa can use plunge attacks to gain Night Soul points. She will then enter the Fiery Passion state when she reaches maximum Night Soul points via this method, or when she uses her Elemental Burst Guardian Vent, which we'll look at in a second as well. So as you saw by just tapping the skill, we already have like half a bar. Now by going right into the charge attack, we can then do a charged. And if we go into the skill again, now we have maximum Night Soul on the side of our bar, which allows us to then go plunge immediately right back down. So you tend to see that as well with her as a character. You're basically using your skill and then immediately doing a tap or your normal attack to do that charge attack and pounce you into the air, and then do another normal attack or plunge attack at that instance to then plunge while you're in the middle of the air to do a larger damage hit. Now, in this state, while in the Fiery Passion state, her normal attacks, elemental skill, and elemental burst will gain unique effects or buffs. She can then also use an elemental skill or an elemental burst shortly after using a plunging attack. The Fiery Passion state lasts for up to 15 seconds and will end when she runs out of Night Soul points or after she leaves combat for a period of time. So once again, you're kind of seeing this idea of making sure that she can get up to that certain amount of Night Soul points, making sure she can get the damage across, obviously making sure she's doing those plunging damage hits. Now, in the fiery, if you remember with the fiery passion plunge attacks here, that is still based in the normal attack talent. So the damage that you're doing in the fiery passion plunging damage here is still extremely good. And then initial charge attack that you're doing as well, popping her into the air, is also getting some pretty good damage at 148% at level 8. So definitely some pretty good multipliers for what you're getting from the fiery passion state, and definitely some pretty good multipliers obviously in the skill. Now you are getting the initial damage hit here at the rush damage, and your fiery passion rush damage is actually when you're inside the fiery passion rush hit. So it's when you're using your skill, but you're already actually in the fiery passion state. So there's definitely some extra increases to the damage that you can do with the actual abilities from the skill. Now you also have a follow-up strike duration of 5 seconds, meaning basically while you're actually in and going through the fiery passion state, you have that extra little thing up here called the follow-up strike. Now, once again, that follow-up strike effect happens when you use your skill. So that's actually when you have the effect of the increased interruption resistance, doing the normal attack that's going to pounce you into the air as a charge attack, and then doing that charge attack or that plunge attack into the ground. So that's actually what that little bit is. You have that 5-second duration after using the skill to then use your normal attack to pop yourself into the air. Then you'll have the Night Soul limit of 40. It makes sense. You use your skill once. You saw I had it at half gauge. I used the skill again right afterwards, and I got to maximum at 40. 20 times 2 is 40. It makes pretty easy sense. Your cooldown is 9 seconds. This is pretty helpful actually to know, because you do want to make sure you're taking your time almost with her and kind of making sure you're kind of doing her kind of rotation correctly, because it can get a little messy if you kind of try to spam things a little bit too quickly or don't watch certain things in the correct way. And because of this cooldown, it can get pretty rough when you actually try to go use her consistently in teams. Now let's go ahead and talk about the burst, getting on through the vast majority and very longness of her kit. Looking at her burst, she's going to deal Night Soul aligned AoE electro damage to opponents by using her burst. After using the burst, Varesa's Night Soul points will be restored to the maximum, and she will enter the Fiery Passion state. While she's in this Fiery Passion state, Varesa's elemental burst will deal a greater amount of Night Soul AoE aligned electro damage. You kind of have a little thing on the side that'll actually let you know when you've hit enemies or whatever, when you're in that state, that your burst is going to allow you to do more damage, and it actually will allow you to use your burst. So once you're actually popped yourself up into the air, using that burst is actually going to be a great opportunity as well to do a larger damage hit. Obviously, you can see here, your burst is going from a flying kick. If you just used it outright without being in that state by just using your skill, if you use your skill and then your burst, you go from 550% to 920%. Once again, these multipliers that are only at level 8, and as you get higher, they get even better, obviously. Now, your cooldown is for 18 seconds on your burst, but we're going to talk about some passives that allow something a little bit different to kind of change that around. Then also you have your Volcano Kablam damage, which we're actually going to talk about in a second. It's like a smaller version of the burst. So let's get a little bit further in the burst state. Additionally, she will briefly activate Apex Drive after using a plunging attack while in her Fiery Passion state. Once again, that plunge attack is literally just this. So skill, jump, and plunge. That is it. That little plunge at the very end is exactly what it's talking about there. Now looking at that little last part here, stating in the Apex Drive, it increases Varesa's interruption resistance. While affected by Apex Drive, Varesa can ignore her elemental burst cooldown and consume less energy to use her special elemental burst, Guardian Vent, Volcano Kablam, which we saw earlier in the skill attributes. This causes her to use this especially powerful plunging attack, the thunderous Tornado Eruption, which deals Night Soul aligned AoE electro damage upon landing before causing her to exit the Apex Drive. So if you do this, it will exit you out of the Apex Drive, so you can't just do it over and over again, but it is nice to know that you can use it and actually get a pretty big damage hit because of it. Now, once again, this Volcano Kablam damage is less than half the energy cost that you actually need for the Fiery Passion Flying Kick damage. And you'll kind of see on the right side, once we actually get through combat, you're actually going to see a little bit of the idea of that like gauge on her bar. You can use it and it lights up purple for you to use. That's your Volcano Kablam damage. But if you wait for that gauge to actually reach maximum, you can then obviously do your Fiery Passion Flying Kick damage, which goes from the 644% damage hit to the 920%. So basically, you're have two different types of ultimates you can use. If you guys are more used to characters in Star Rail or something like that, characters like Argenti and Yunli do something very similar. Now, let's go ahead and talk about some passives, as we've definitely taken a lot of time already going over her kit. Looking at the first passive, it states that after using the elemental skill, Riding the Night Rainbow, Varesa gains the Rainbow Crash state for 5 seconds. During this time, when Varesa uses a plunging attack, the shockwave damage dealt when she hits the ground is increased by 50% of her attack. If Varesa is in the Fiery Passion state, this ground impact damage is increased by 180% instead of 50% of her attack as well. The Rainbow Crash effect will be cancelled once a ground impact hits an opponent, whether it is the lower amount of damage or the higher amount, or when its duration expires, obviously that 5 seconds that we see at the very beginning. So a nice little extra damage hit for those plunging attacks, which is very good considering that's what she literally is all about. Looking at her second passive talent, it states that when a nearby party member triggers a Night Soul Burst, which is when any type of elemental damage is being done and there is at least one Natlan character in the team, Varesa's attack increases by 35% for 12 seconds with a max of 2 stacks. Each stack's duration is counted independently. So, obviously, with the max of 2 stacks, you can get this pretty quickly, meaning the more Natlan characters, the better, because if you can get that Night Soul Burst cooldown, if I believe you have one Natlan character, it's about 18 seconds. So if you can bring that down a lot lower, you can actually get the maximum stacks here, giving yourself an extra 70% attack, having both of those stacks going on. As well as if you can keep having 2 stacks, like if you can always refresh that second stack over and over again and make sure that you're always at 2, you can practically always have that 70% attack increase for your Varesa. Now, obviously, we have all of her Natlan mechanics in her last passive talent here, and then obviously her regular one here. Now, looking at her as a character, that was definitely a lot, and we'll go over, and if you want to kind of understand more how she should be played correctly, in a very basic sense, with Varesa, you basically just want to use your skill, jump, and plunge, and then just basically rinse and repeat. Now, the great thing is a lot of the times you'll get another skill usage, actually, like it talked about in the skill, is that you'll get another skill usage to then use for yourself to attack at the enemy without using up one of these 2 charges. So basically, it's skill, normal, which is going to do skill, charge, pop in the air, and plunge, like this, plunge, and then if you do that basically one more time, you're basically having that happen except 2 more times, because once again you're going to be having this happen 2 more times without actually using a charge of your skill. So you can do a basically skill, normal, plunge, and then skill, normal, plunge with only using one of your charges. And obviously, once again, as we get into the gameplay section, you'll start to see a little bit more of what I mean. Now let's go ahead and talk about the next part of her kit, which is her obviously her weapons here. Now, I do not have her at max level, and that is purely because I have been extremely lacking on getting her, and there we go, level 89. Now, I've been extremely lacking on actually having any of the ability to have the extra enhancement ore. Hopefully you are not at that point, and obviously very low in Mora. As you can see, she was a little expensive. So with her as a character though, looking at her weapons, obviously her personal weapon is going to be her best. High base attack with a good amount of crit damage. It's not an insane amount, it's definitely not the highest, it's actually, I believe, a little bit on the lower end, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's practically useless. Obviously, you have your attack percent, and she gives up to 68% crit damage on top of her already given 44.1 at level 90. So actually you have about 100% crit damage here. Now keep in mind, if you're in like the apex drive state and you go ahead and use the powerful plunging attack, the Thunderous Tornado Eruption, while you're in the burst, you actually have this as your plunging attack damage. So that actually can be some pretty good ability to actually have a pretty good big damage hit. Obviously the rest of her kit is literally all about doing plunging attacks. So having over 100% crit damage in the weapon while still having a high amount of base attack is definitely extremely good. Now, besides this specific weapon, there are a few other weapons that you definitely can use. Now, it really does not necessarily too much depend on what exactly you're building, whether or not you're using certain one of the artifact sets. I honestly think that at the end of the day, with the teams you're using, obviously Vivid Notions is going to be your best weapon. Another great weapon, it's actually a standard weapon, is Lost Prayer to the Sacred Winds. With a 608 base attack and a 33.1% crit rate, and she is ascending into crit rate, it's really good to have this actual weapon, because yes, you get some extra movement speed, which she already has a very fast movement mechanic in the game, but also when in battle you gain an 8% elemental damage bonus for every 4 seconds and you have max of 4 stacks. Varesa likes to be on the field very long. Now, it's not an entire 16-second duration, but it is actually a pretty long duration, so she can actually use up a lot of these stacks compared to some other characters that might not be able to actually get the full 16 seconds of stacks. And that's really just because of how a lot of the other characters that are catalysts work. Now, even a character like Neuvillette actually really, even at C0 or C1, really actually only wants to be on the field for a maximum of like 9, maybe 12 seconds. And that's still not hitting the maximum here, and Varesa is still easily hitting that without all the extra kind of intricacies that to do that with Neuvillette you kind of have to do. Now, that's at least one specific weapon you could use. Another good weapon you could use is actually a weapon that is for Yae Miko. Now, Yae Miko's weapon is going to be Kagura's Verity. Kagura's Verity at level 90 is going to give you 608 base attack with 66.2% crit damage. So less crit, or more crit damage than you have in her personal weapon, but less base attack. Now, the ability states that using a skill will cause the elemental skill damage of the character wielding this weapon to increase by 12%. If you remember the damage that she does, she's going to be doing a lot of that damage for elemental skill hits, so that's actually very helpful. Also, when you have the max of those 3 stacks, you're going to get another 12% all elemental damage bonus on top of that, just making sure you get some extra damage. Now, it's not going to be necessarily super easy to make sure you get these 3 stacks, but honestly, with the amount of times you're using your elemental skill, it probably actually will be, because really, you're getting that skill back a lot. And even if you're not getting the maximum stacks all the time, which you really should be, it is still a pretty nice buff to get either way. Beyond looking at that weapon, though, there are plenty of other weapons that can necessarily work. Obviously, any of your stat stick weapons here that could be somewhat useful. Things like, obviously, Tula's Remembrance is going to be a pretty good weapon, just because, once again, same stats as what her actual personal weapon has, but the ability is practically useless for her, because it's really based on normal attack damage. Now, alongside of that, something that's also not extremely helpful for her is going to be Tome of the Eternal Flow. Now, it does have a low base attack, but it has an extremely high crit damage hit, so once again, that's why I stated these are more of your stat chasing weapons, because that's really all you're caring about here. The ability, once again, not really useful. Now, another weapon you could use, same amount of base attack with a low amount of crit rate, is going to be Cash Flow Supervision. Similar to the others, except you do have one useful stat here that you can use, which is the attack percent you get in the weapon, just because Wriothesley and Varesa here both go and do damage off of their attack. Whereas the other characters, obviously a character like Neuvillette is based off HP. Besides looking at the 5 stars, and there are some other weapons that you technically could use, Skyward Atlas, and even maybe other attack percent specific weapons that you really want to use, technically could be somewhat helpful if you really want to. But once again, I think that the best case scenario for her is obviously her weapon. I really do actually like Lost Prayer for her, and it is a standard weapon, so if you do have it, definitely throw it on her if you don't have her personal weapon. Besides that, we have something like the Widsith in the 4-star weapons. This is actually an extremely good weapon, just because you're having a 10-second duration that you're doing a lot of your damage, which kind of lines up with actually what she wants to do. Now, with her, usually the teams I'll show you later, we're not really going to be really worrying about Elemental Mastery, so you have a 2 in 3 chance of this actually being a good buff for you, but if you get the Elemental Mastery buff, it kind of really defeats a lot of the extra damage that you can get out of this. So keep that in mind, as it is basically a gotcha weapon in and of itself. And you also do have a 20-second downtime, which can really hurt you considering her rotations are pretty quick. Now, alongside of that, you also have to keep in mind there are some other weapons you could use. Looking at more stat-sticky weapons, things like the Battle Pass options, which is Solar Pearl and Sacrificial Jade. I've looked at these already, thought about them a little bit more, and honestly, you're not really getting a crazy amount of help here. You don't really do enough normal attacks to consistently help with the damage increase here. So if you want to try to throw in some normal attacks to get the extra elemental skill damage and the elemental burst damage buff from Solar Pearl, this could work. It's just really not, it doesn't feel good to do. So that's really my big kind of opinion specifically with Solar Pearl. Whereas something like Sacrificial Jade really comes down to being absolutely borderline useless, considering you don't want to be on the field for more than 5 seconds, and it's an HP increase and an Elemental Mastery increase, which does practically nothing for you. You're really just crit fishing at that point with the main stat. Now, there are plenty of other 4 stars that you could try to throw together and run. Not too much of a fan of plenty of the others, but if you're looking for attack percent weapons, those can work. I've Perception does well at that. You don't really care, once again, about the basic or the normal and charge attacks here, so the ability goes out the window. But any of those are probably going to be your best options for you. Once again, same thing with like Dodeko Tails for the attack percent main stats. But besides that, any energy recharge, maybe like HP percent, a lot of these other, other weapons don't really do anything for her and have not too much use on her. So really the weapons I've talked about are really going to be the best ones for you. Now let's go ahead and talk about her artifacts pretty quickly because honestly, there are only 2 sets you should be using. Now, she did get a brand new set, which is going to be right here, Long Night's Oath. This set states that the 2-piece increases plunging attack damage by 25%, and the 4-piece states that after the equipping character's plunging attack, charge attack, or elemental skill hits an opponent, they will gain 1, 2, and 2 stacks of Radiance Everlasting. Plunging attacks, charge attacks, or elemental skills can trigger this effect every 1 second. Radiance Everlasting states that plunging attacks deal 15% increased damage for 6 seconds with a max of 5 stacks. Each stack's duration can be counted independently as well, meaning you can keep these 5 stacks going all the time if you can consistently hit with the plunging, charged, and elemental skill hits. So very, very good set, obviously very, very strong, and it's specifically meant for a character like Varesa. Now, there are some other characters it can use, but that's another talk for another day. Specifically for Varesa, this is technically her best set. But being a brand new set, it might not be the set for you. What I mean by that is, by calculations and what other people have done, a C0R1 and even C0R0 of Varesa on something like Obsidian Codex versus this new set, Long Night's Oath, Long Night's Oath only beats that other set by maybe 2 to 3, maybe 5% at the best, if you obviously have like the exact same roles. Now, in my personal opinion, I think a lot more people are going to have something like Obsidian Codex. Obsidian Codex is just a couple of percent worse, but it's kind of like with your character like Echoes of an Offering with Ayato. This is technically Ayato's personal best set. But honestly, what plenty of players use and don't really care not to use or to always use is going to be Gladiator's Finale. And that's because this set is only a couple percent worse than his personal set as well. And sometimes, depending on your ping, can be better. So that's really the idea with at least these specific sets, what you really want to do. Obsidian Codex definitely sits at the top. If you want to figure that out a little bit more, there are plenty of people that talk about it with a lot more calculations. Characters like, or people like Zajef, Jello, TGS is a great one as well, as he goes in depth into it a lot more. You can even look at somebody like I Win to Lose Gaming as well. They've gone into the calculations a lot more, and that's really the idea with these specific sets. Now, overall, with Obsidian Codex, this states that the 2-piece set will increase, or while the equipping character is in the Night's Soul Blessing state and is on the field, their damage is increased by 15%. Now, you're always going to see with that plunging attack, she's always going to be in her Night's Soul Blessing state, specifically Varesa. At the same time, this 4-piece states that after the equipping character consumes 1 Night's Soul point while on the field, crit rate will increase by 40% for 6 seconds. Now, when you do that punch attack with her at the end of the day, you're actually getting rid of all your Night's Soul points, which is then actually giving you that 40% crit rate increase as soon as you do that plunge, which is pretty helpful because that's a very nice stat increase for Varesa. So that's something to keep in mind specifically with this 4-piece set. A very good set and actually can be very useful for her. It's only second best by only a couple percent. At the end of the day, if you are grinding this brand new set that you're looking at for her, Long Night's Oath, and you have better pieces on Long Night's Oath somehow, and the game actually loves you, better than what you have on Obsidian Codex, use Long Night's Oath. But at the same time, if you have better pieces on your Obsidian Codex, just use that set. It's going to outdo what your Long Night's Oath is going to be, and it's also going to take a lot of time to do so. Now, don't get me wrong, I am obviously farming this brand new set for Varesa, but also for my Zhao. So if you're like me and you're like, you know what, I don't care, I still want to do it, I highly recommend it, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun, and I love when new sets come out and grinding them, so I wish you and myself the best of luck. Now, overall, with the different main stats you're going to want to do, there's really only a few. You're never going to find different ones. It's attack percent, electro damage bonus, and crit rate or crit damage. Now, here I go for crit rate just because my build is not extremely good, and a lot of people will go for a crit damage circlet, and that's really because they're getting the higher number of crit damage, and they're okay with having a very low amount of crit. I really like, especially with her, because I like her big numbers, and she hits so consistently. I want to make sure that her technical lower numbers, she's not hitting Mawika, close to a couple million. I want to make sure that each of her hits crits so that the maximum number of hits that she does, all of them are critting to make sure that they can equal at least somewhere in the half of the realm of what my Mawika can hit. So I try to make sure that I have a higher crit. Now you might be saying 55 is not very high. once again add that 40% that I get from Obsidian Codex, and that's going to be much higher. I'll probably be keeping her on a crit rate circlet anyways when I get over to the new set, just because once again, same thing, I want to try to have a pretty good amount of crit rate. That really does depend on you. Most players, as I've seen so far, use crit damage, so I'm not going to necessarily tell you one way or the other to do it. I personally just like a higher crit rate. Now, looking over at the other things with her kit, we've already looked at everything else. Now let's talk about her constellations. Now, in my personal opinion, I think she works exceptionally well at C0. She's an extremely strong and very meta DPS, and I think that that just goes to show with a lot of the damage she does, which we'll talk about, or I'll at least show you in the gameplay. Looking at her first constellation, it states that the effects of the passive talent Tag Team Triple Jump are enhanced. If we look back at that, that is this extremely kind of interesting one where she gets a bunch of attack or a bunch of damage increase from the shockwave, on top of whether or not she's in the fiery passion state, whether it's 50% or 180%. So basically, whether or not you're doing that skill, you're getting that big damage increase. So that will change over to when performing the special plunging attack, Thunderous Tornado Eruption, Varesa will also gain Rainbow Crash for 5 seconds. When Rainbow Crash is in effect, Varesa's plunging attack ground impact states specifically that it's 180%. So there is no chance for it to be that 50%, which is actually very nice to have. Also, additionally, when Varesa is in the sudden onrush mode of her Night's Blessing state while she's running around, she will consume 30% less Night's points or Phlogiston, which could be very good for your overall, overworld running around and completion of what you're getting done there. Now, looking at the C2, it states that Varesa will enter the Apex Drive after using a plunging attack, regardless of whether she is in the Fiery Passion state or not. Also, extremely goated. When Apex Drive status is active, Varesa's interruption resistance will also further increase. Additionally, she will restore 11.5 energy when her plunging attack ground impact hits an opponent. Now, you might say, okay, she's an electric character, she gives herself some energy, that's great, that's fantastic. But you know, Vixen, I don't really understand why I need to, because I can still use her Volcano Kablam and using a lower amount of energy. Keep in mind, if you're getting a bunch of energy back and you're hitting yourself to the point where you're getting a lot of energy back, to the point where you can get up to close to 70, you're already giving yourself a pretty big jump closer to 70 to do your bigger damage hit that you can do. So honestly, I just feel like that's just a better way to do things, and that C2 is absolutely insane to do that. Usually with C2s, we tend to see something crazy, which when you initially look at the constellation doesn't really seem like too much, but when you actually start to think about it, you actually start to see some crazy amounts of damage that are increased here. Looking at the C3, you're going to be increasing the level of your burst by 3, and looking at the C5, it increases the level of the skill by 3. Once again, I'll just show you guys that is Guardian Vent, and then your normal attack talent. Looking at the C4 really quickly here, it states that Varesa will receive various buffs based on her state when using her elemental burst. If Varesa has neither Fiery Passion or Apex Drive active, she will gain Diligent Refinement for 15 seconds, which will increase her plunging attack ground impact damage by 500% of her attack with a maximum increase of 20,000 damage. This effect will be cancelled once the ground impact hits an opponent or if its duration ends. That in and of itself is great, but let's keep going. If she has either Fiery Passion or Apex Drive active, this instance of her Elemental Burst deals 100% increased damage. That's a lot. That's doubling the amount of damage you're doing. So if you're doing a 200k damage hit, that's actually 400k. And if you can do that more consistently, you're constantly hitting 400ks. This C4 is actually amazing. Now, usually with C4s, in the past, we've seen kind of on and off, really. A lot of characters, some characters do it with energy. Some characters make it their not energy, where they kind of do something actually useful. Not to say the energy is useless, especially with this character, energy is actually pretty helpful, but we already saw that with the C2, which is why I think it's the C2, because it actually is pretty helpful, because you're giving yourself more energy, giving yourself closer to that 70 energy cost, which is allowing you to get more damage off because you're hitting a higher damage number and multiplier, which is why I think the C2 is the C2. Now, the C4, on the other hand, is actually what you might think would have been the C2 just because of the damage increases that you get. So it's pretty straightforward with the damage increases you can get here. Looking at the C6, though, it states that Varesa restores 30 energy when she enters the Apex Drive. That's insane, because if you, once again, look at the Apex Drive in her burst right here, it states that additionally she will briefly activate Apex Drive after using a plunge attack while in her Fiery Passion state. Pretty easy, pretty self-explanatory, just to have that there, by the way. I do think that that's pretty good, because obviously you're going to be getting that pretty often, which is increasing your interruption resistance. While affected by Apex Drive, you're getting all this, elemental burst cooldowns, you know, you're not worrying about it anymore. You're really just worrying about the energy, and consume less energy to use her special elemental burst. So you're going from 70 down to 30, and you can kind of bounce between the two, and you're already kind of seeing what you can do here. So basically, you're going to be getting yourself into that state pretty easily. Now the C6 states, while you are going to be, when you enter that state, you're just getting an extra 30 energy, which is pretty insane because that is almost half of the 70 energy cost. Never mind the other 11.5 you're going to get from the C2. Now you're over half the amount of energy that you need. Just telling you guys pretty straight up, it's pretty easy to get the amount of energy you need up to half, or the 30 energy cost to use the like kablam, or the like smaller amount of damage. So getting the C6 basically guarantees you're getting that bigger damage hit every single time you want to use it. I still think that's pretty insane. Also, her plunging attacks and elemental burst gain 10% crit rate and 100% crit damage. Additionally, when Varesa uses the hold version of her elemental skill, or the taps her elemental skill while in the sudden onrush mode, so basically when you're already running and you tap the skill, she will restore Night Soul points up to her maximum. So, a lot of people would tend to use basically that hold skill with the C6 and then immediately tap the skill and then immediately get maximum Night Soul points, putting her in her Night Soul Blessing state, which is then putting her in the fiery onrush mode, or the fiery passion mode, which is increasing all of your damage that you're doing, and then doing a plunge at that point, putting you in the Apex Drive, which the Apex Drives gives you more energy. She's literally a very circular character, and it very much matches her feet as she runs. So a very strong constellation that she has here. Obviously, being her C6 and being a very strong and good character, the C6 being strong makes sense. Overall, though, as much as the constellations are absolutely insane and she's a very strong character, very much like Malwika, I still think that a C0 character right here works perfectly fine and does extremely well. I use her at C0 and I'm seeing insane numbers in what I can get out of her. I'll show you guys a little bit more, obviously, now in the gameplay that I did with her. Before I go ahead and show you guys any of the gameplay I did, hope that you guys will look over at the teams now. Let's go ahead and talk about the teams next. Now, looking overall at her teams, I still think the most fun and consistent team that I had was going to be Varesa, Iansan, Chevis, and Bennett. And yes, you can move some of these characters around. I really just feel like this is the best combo with them. Now, Bennett's ult is going to be very stationary, so you have to be kind of picky with how that works overall. I think is the bigger thing to keep in mind is that his Varesa moves around a lot. Bennett's ult is stationary. Iansan's buff will stay with Varesa, and honestly, I found myself missing Iansan when I didn't run her in the gameplay I've done so far. So I really do like Iansan. Not to say that Varesa can't work without her. I just mean to say that even at C1, I don't have that nice C2. Iansan is just really, really fun and easy and really great support for Varesa. Now, in this team, though, obviously, you've got great things. You've got technically 3 different healers because Iansan and Chevis do a little bit of healing. Bennett's your bigger healer. And you've got characters like Bennett and Iansan that are giving just a bunch of attack to Varesa. At the same time, you've got Chevis, which is doing, I believe, a resistance shred, as well as an electro and pyro damage bonus, which is really with her C6 specifically, but still, and then depending on what set she's using, she can also give a pretty nice buff as well. So there's kind of just some great things you get really with this team. Obviously, these teams are extremely strong. And with this team, not only are you getting all the attack from the characters, but also the resonances are really strong here. You're getting the attack increase from the pyro resonance, and the electro resonance, you're getting all those extra particles, which is really good for Varesa considering we talk so much about her burst being wanted consistently. Now, her burst cooldown does go down for that special burst she does, but you want to make sure you're getting a lot of extra of those particles. It's pretty nice to just have all the time. Overall, though, with this team, this is definitely, I think, the best team. And I think some of the gameplay you guys will see, you can definitely tell is a little skewed considering the second half of the Spiral Abyss is definitely favoring plunging attacks specifically. So a lot of the numbers you'll see are maybe not going to be as high, maybe in different Abyss, but at the same time, I think that also maybe specifically some of these teams are going to change a little bit as well. Now, looking beyond this Overload team, I would say, honestly, the next team I tried out was this team, which threw together, actually I had Chilona, I believe, first, and Shunyun at the end. with this team kind of together, you have Farina, which is draining HP with 2 solid healers to make up for it, giving a lot of fanfare points back to Farina with the changes in HP always happening, as well with the damage buff that Farina can give, as well as her own personal damage. Shilonen is being a really solid buffer with her resistance shred, as well as elemental damage bonus in her 4-piece set, and Shanyu is giving even more resistance shred with the 4-piece Viridescent if these both are swirling Electro. That is kind of the only issue, is if you accidentally are swirling, or creating Crystallize with Hydro here, kind of taking a lot of damage away from Varesa, but at the same time, you're giving that damage to another damage dealer, which is Farina. So it's kind of a give and take relationship. Yes, you'd rather have that on Varesa, but it really didn't kill me at the end of the day if it accidentally did so. I really just didn't pay attention to it. Now, Shan Yun's obviously giving a great buff. I have her weapon. She's C0R1, so I definitely did get some pretty good application and usage out of her with her weapon and herself. Keep in mind, my Shilonen is C2R1. I practically tried to keep Shilonen in here with Varesa as much as possible, and at the same time, the reason majorly is not just because Shilonen's a great character, and although she is, I do think that the more, once again, Natlan characters you have, the better, because you're making that buff that Varesa gets with the attack in her passive, you're allowing that to happen more consistently. So I think the more Natlan characters you have in a team, the better. So, speaking of more Natlan characters, I got rid of Farina just to see what it was like. I know I'm, almost producing a cardinal sin by even saying that. I threw in Iansan instead. And honestly, like I said before, I had a really rough time not having fun with Iansan. So I think, overall, not having Iansan in the team really didn't necessarily hurt. Farina's a very good character and a very good team, and you guys will even see the time clears and everything in the Abyss that I go ahead and do in a second. But Varesa and Yansan gets this resonance right here, which is the extra particle creation. Both of these characters, she's giving an attack buff, which is instantly helping a lot of the higher multipliers that Varesa gets based off of attack, which is definitely very good. Not to say Farina's buff, once again, isn't bad. I'm just saying that it was extremely satisfying to have and use consistently. At the same time, there was no need for any of the swirls or the Shilonen's buffs to get in the way of any reactions, considering always having other characters that are producing some reactions with Electro being on the field are always making sure that Electro is being swirled or crystallized, making sure their buffs are actually being targeted specifically for Electro. So I was definitely seeing a lot of happiness and good use there. This is almost what you would call a hyper-built Varesa team, in my opinion. Almost like we used to have Raiden, Yaimiko, and Kujo Sara with a Bennett. This is kind of the hyper-built Varesa team, in my opinion. Now, once again, my Yansan is level 70 with a level 70 weapon, and she's C1, doesn't have the nice C2. My Varesa is C0R1, my Shilonen, once again, is C2R1, and my Shan is C0R1. My Farina, by the way, was C0R1, and that's kind of something to keep in mind. My Shivers was C6, and my Bennett is C6 if that happens to mean anything to anybody as well, because of that buff that he gives. So that is something to keep in mind with what you're doing with the teams, and just to keep in mind with the teams that I have. Also, once again, this Abyss will kind of change how certain teams kind of actually reacted, in my personal opinion. Now, I also did try a different team as well, kind of running with different things, but the next, and probably the last thing I do want to talk about, is going to be actually the Aggravate team. Now, in general, I'm not a huge fan of this Aggravate team, but I'm not going to lie to you, I'm pretty sure it was one of the faster clears, if not on par with the other clears that I did. Now, keep in mind, I was going up against the Terror Shroom, which really likes to have a lot of Electro already on it, and I'm giving Varesa a better reaction by just having Aggravate on, and by it being a character like Baiju is pretty solid, never mind if you have Nahida. But I honestly feel like Baiju is almost better in a sense, and I know, once again, Cardinal Sin to probably say, but Nahida's really brings personal damage as well as just a bunch of EM, which is really great for characters that kind of scale off EM, but Varesa doesn't. And although this is an Aggravate team and EM would be extremely helpful, and I don't have Nahida to necessarily tell you that Nahida would be bad, I just really liked the Baiju. I'm sure that also having Nahida would also be extremely strong, but that's something to keep in mind with you guys. Baiju, Shanyun, and Yansan are all technically healers here, making sure that Varesa is never dying, and if you are somehow dying, I'd love to know how. Same thing with that Overload team. But that's kind of something to keep with these two characters. Similar thing, Shan Yun's getting that swirl on these Electro pretty easily because the swirl can't happen on Dendro. So that swirl's always happening on the Electro if it's there. So then, Baiju's not really getting in the way of any of these swirls and buffing for Eonsan, or specifically Varesa, sorry, anyways. But that's really overall the teams that I have. If you guys have any other teams, I know there are plenty of other teams that I wanted to try, and I definitely did, but these were the ones that started out and the ones that I definitely think did the best. Some of the other teams, you could definitely switch out a lot of the teams that I've talked about. In the Overload team, if you don't have Yansan, that's perfectly fine. I still do highly in that team, highly recommend another Electro character in that team specifically, just because a lot of that extra particle creation could be really good for Varesa. You could even do something like a Kujosara. A Beta would be great considering she's so close combat, and those extra hits from, shielding her as well could be really good. Also, keep in mind you could use a character like Fischl for extra damage. Same thing with like Yaimiko. That could be kind of your extra characters there. Shevers and Bennett, in my opinion, there are pretty hard to get rid of, but technically, Shevers could be the only pyro character. You're just going to have to use the burst to get your overcharged ball with your skill. So that kind of comes a little special, which is why I like to have a second pyro character in that team, usually with Shevers. Now, overall, also with the other team, with something like the Varesa, Shan Yun, and Shilonen and Farina, with the Farina comp, I think the Farina comp was good. If you don't have somebody like Shilonen or a character, and in that team specifically, I say if you don't have Shilonen, just you, and you don't have, let's say, Shan Yun, use a character like Sucrose, Venti, any of your Animo Swirlers to make up for the Viridescent Shred, and then also bring in another character that, like Yansan, hopefully you have her, to then put in that team as well, still giving you that double Electro kind of feel, also still being a pretty good attack buffer, and kind of making up for some of the Resistance Shred and the Elemental Damage bonus by having Yansan there to give some extra attack. In some of the other teams, you could definitely switch around some characters. In this team, you could easily switch out like Baiju over for a different character like Nahida, Dendro Traveler. Any of your Dendro characters that are off-field supports with lots of application are going to be very highly valuable. Yao as well. Shan Yun, obviously, I kind of just chose the premium support here. You could use a Venti, a Sucrose. Overall, I think that, with this team specifically, you could easily switch out with like Baiju and Shan Yun. You could get rid of Shan Yun and use like another Animo Swirler. Just make sure they're using Viridescent like a support. Same thing with Baiju. If you're going to be using that, find a support character like Dendro or something like that. Dendro Traveler, Nahida, somebody with constant Dendro application. That's really going to be your best bet here as well. Technically, the other characters can kind of come up with some pretty good heals as well. So if you use someone like Sayu or Jean, that also works really well, and even Yao to kind of make up for the heals that you might be losing. But Yansan is also a healer, so that does kind of help a little bit as well.
Care for a dance?
Everybody stand!
Dance with me!
You ask! On my mark! Quick as a flash! Boom.
The show's only just begun.
Justice o'clock!
Not done yet.
Cake!
The curtain
Charge!
falls.
Smash down! Let's light it up! I'm going in! Justice will start the clock!
Control breathing.
It's justice o'clock! Yeah! Oof! Volcano kablam! Headbutt! Teamwork is dreamwork! On my mark! Quick as a flash! Charge! Yeah!
Care for a dance?
Gray cloud converge!
Dance with me!
Let the mountain's veins boil! Start the clock!
Be a good
Quick as a
audience,
flash.
won't you?
Headbutt! Smash down!
The curtain
Yeah! Boom!
falls.
Look out below! Hey! Yeah! Yeah! Heads up! Hey! Yeah!
Make way for the...
Let engraved names echo! On my mark!
Control
Headbutt! Hey! Yeah! Look out below! Charge!
Care for a dance?
Seize the skies!
Dance with me!
Let engraved names echo! Strike a pose!
The show's only just begun.
Hey!
At least
Oof!
we're here to watch.
Yeah! Headbutt! Charge! Yeah! Yeah! Skyward! Yoo-hoo!
Make way for the attack.
Oof! Look out below! Charge!
Care for a dance? Dance with me!
Clouds converge! Quick as a flash! Let's
Seems like
Be
an
a good
emergency.
audience, won't you?
heads up! Hero incoming!
I'm not done yet. At least you were here to watch.
Look out below! Hero incoming! Got him!
Make way for the...
Start the clock! Step aside!
Mind the side effect.
Headbutt! Hi! Yeah! Oof! Justice o'clock!
Remember, health comes first.
Skyward! Control breathing.
Let's move! Yeah! Heads up! Hi! Yeah!
Well, thank you guys for watching the video. If you guys did like the video, please go ahead and like and subscribe. I do really enjoy Eon-san, or Varesa. I do enjoy Eon-san, which we'll talk about in a later video, but I really did enjoy Varesa overall. She's been an extremely fun character to use. I love plunge characters. I've been a Zhao main for a very long time, since his first release, the very beginning of the game, and I've also just really enjoyed Catalyst characters as well, Neuvillette, and especially a character like Risley, as I made a build guide on him very recently. When he first came out, I also got him, so I just really love these characters, and I really do like the aesthetic that she's brought, and Natlan has come to be very fun for me. Overall, with her as a character, I'm very excited and very thankful that she's kind of a very good character, but at the same time, I'm still really just caring and enjoying the fun that she is. Honestly, once you get used to a lot of her combos, she really just becomes a mash character, almost like just playing like Super Smash or something, where you're just mashing buttons. You kind of know what you're doing, where you're getting to a point where you're just smashing the same buttons over and over again, and it's just super fun. So if you guys once again did like the video though, and without me yapping anymore, please go ahead and like and subscribe, and thank you guys again for watching the video. I'll see you guys in the next one.